Okay, in this segment, we are going to install the switch, USB port for auxiliary power, the power wires, and we will talk about installing the resistors. Okay, so here's our control board for MyPlace. On the MyPlace board, the only part of the circuit that actually has electricity flowing through it are the LEDs. The resistors are just for practice. So here I've already installed the switch. You put the switch in over here. It has a place. Notice it says battery or 5 volts. In the battery position, when we have this hooked up, it will feed off our 9-volt battery. In the 5-volt position, we'll pull power off the USB port. Now, because LEDs typically run on 5 volts, our resistors in this circuit are going to cause a voltage drop that is going to allow the 9-volt portion of this circuit to work, which means that we have 2 sets of resistors for both sets of LED colored lights. Here we have LED 1 and LED 2. Those represent the entire set of LEDs on the main board, as in this would be the red set and this would be the yellow set. So what we're going to do first is we're going to install our auxiliary USB port. Now, our USB port, if you'll look extremely close, has an extra set of pins in the middle, here and here. Those will need to be trimmed off. Those are data ports on a typical USB configuration. We will not be using the data, and there is no place on the board to install those. So those will need to be trimmed off. We will simply be using the outside ones. If we look here on our USB diagram, we'll see that we have a positive and a negative side to this USB port. So first thing we want to do is we want to trim these points off here. You might have to spread apart the mounting pins. These mounting pins on each side are meant to hold it in place, so when you're plugging the USB port in and out of the board, you don't break it off. These little pins will not do that. So I've already trimmed my pins, and I'm very carefully going to insert this, but I have to be extremely careful not to bend the pins. So I'm going to put one side in. I might have to spread my pins, my mounting pins apart to accomplish this. I'm going to make sure that they both match up, and I'm going to roll them in. Make sure it's firmly seated on the board. Now, first thing I want to do is I want to make sure that I crimp these pins down. So just simply using a tool or flathead screwdriver, give these little mounting pins a bend where they will not come out of the board, and we'll apply some solder there to weld them in place. We're going to bend those down. Here's our 2 power supply off the USB. Make sure that they barely stick through, but I can put my finger on them and I see that they are indeed installed. I'm going to pull this over. I'm going to make sure before we begin soldering we have our safety glasses on. Our sponge is wet. Clean our sponge tip out. By the way, this would be on step 6 of our booklet, the control board. We've already installed our switch, and there is no top or bottom side to that switch, and now we're on step 6B, install the terminal block or USB connector. We're not using the terminal block, we're using the USB connector in our kits. So I'm going to make sure that I get some solder on these mounts. And you might have to put quite a bit of solder on them. We want to make sure they don't come off. These aren't for electrical connectors, these are for bracing. We're going to apply quite a bit of solder. Make sure those don't come loose. And then clean my tip. I will install the power wires. Apply just a small amount of heat, feed in the solder, and then release. Now, once we've done that, we want to come over here and look at our power wires to feed the LED circuit. These circuits will go to the main board. You should have a red wire and a white wire. Cut them in half. That will give us about 4 inches. That would be on step 6C and D of our instruction manual. So the instructions say twist the wires together. I'm going to do what's called tinning the wire. I'm going to put a small amount of solder on this wire in order to keep it from coming apart, and it will also let the solder stick a little better. Now you have to be careful because the holes are small, so you just want a tiny amount of solder on this. So I'm simply going to apply just a tiny bit of solder and just rub it across like so. And it doesn't require a lot. I can even use some of the stuff I already have on my tip. You'll be applying more solder to the board. This keeps the little strands of wire from coming apart when you put them in there, and generally helps out the adhesion of the wire. So we're just going to tin that just a little bit. You may even kind of watch it, and you're going to melt your insulation. If you have it stripped back too much, you can always cut it off once it's inserted. I'll just put a little bit on there, clean our tip. Now the instructions say to twist these wires together. So we're going to twist them like so, just a little bit. All right. So we have our red wire, our positive. That will be inserted into our LED. Here we have tinned the wire. Very critical because this video has been edited. Do not make the mistake I made. Make sure the wires go to the appropriate side of the board. The wires will feed up. And remember our symbol for the LEDs, that the curved side is going to be our positive, and then the wires will feed back down. So the instructions, if you twist them together, maybe that works, maybe it doesn't. You can always twist them back together, but here they're going to feed back down onto the board. You might install your heat shrink to kind of brace them up, like so. And then we're going to solder the wire onto the board. You're going to repeat that procedure for all of the other wires. What this is going to do is each one of these, LED 1 is going to solder onto the main control board and feed power to all the red LEDs. LED 2 is going to solder onto the main control board, the positive and negative, and feed power to all the yellow LEDs. So once you've installed that correctly, your control board is going to mount somewhat to the main board, there's some standoffs. It's going to mount back here. And then those power wires will feed off. But make sure you solder on the correct side. You will have 3 other wires that must solder on there. Once you've completed that, according to step 6, E and F, it's time to install the resistors onto the board. What you need to make sure of here, when you install these resistors, are there 2 different values. R1 and R4 are 82 ohms. R2 and R3 are 10 kilo ohms. If you get them in the wrong place, the circuit will not work. So pay attention to these designations here. And remember to install the other 3 wires, another red one, and 2 more white ones. The white ones will install on the same side, like so. If you want to twist your wires together, you can always pull them back out, but it will install onto the negative side of your board. You will solder on the back side of that. Power to the rest of the circuit. And pay particular attention to the values of the resistors in the next part, that you don't get them mixed up.